I gifted my parents a $425,000 seaside mansion for their 50th anniversary. When I arrived, my mother was crying, and my father trembling. My sister's family had taken over. Her husband stepped toward my dad, pointed to the door, and yelled, "This is my house, get out." My sister laughed until I walked in, and silence fell. The salt air hit me the moment I stepped out of the car. A familiar, welcome friend. It was the scent of my childhood summers, of freedom, of the endless blue horizon that promised anything was possible. I'd driven for 6 hours, a thermos of stale coffee my only companion, the hum of the engine a mantra of success and gratitude. Today was the day, the culmination of 20 years of grinding work, of saving every spare dollar, of sacrificing weekends and holidays. Today was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and I was about to give them the sky, the sea, and a roof over their heads worthy of the love they'd given me. The house was a sprawling Cape Cod, painted a gentle seafoam green with crisp white trim, perched on a low bluff overlooking the Atlantic. It had a wraparound porch and enough windows to bankrupt a professional cleaner, each one a perfect frame for the ocean. I had closed on it 3 weeks ago, a ghost in the transaction, everything handled through my lawyer and a shell corporation to keep my name off it until the reveal. The deed, now resting in my parents' names, was tucked into a beautiful, hand-tooled leather portfolio on the passenger seat. I took a deep, steadying breath, the salty air filling my lungs. This was it! The surprise was set. My parents thought they were just meeting me here for a celebratory lunch at a nearby restaurant. They had arrived an hour ago, dropped off by a car service I'd arranged. I'd told them I was running late, a classic me move, to give them time to wander the grounds, to fall in love with the place on their own terms before I even said a word. I imagined my mother, her hand on my father's arm, walking along the stone path, commenting on the hydrangeas bursting with blue and purple blooms. I imagined my father, a quiet man of simple tastes, looking out at the water with that soft, peaceful expression he got whenever he was near the coast. I smiled, the fatigue of the long drive melting away, replaced by a thrum of pure, unadulterated joy. This was more than a house. It was a thank you. It was an apology for all the times I was too busy, too far away. It was a promise that their final years would be filled with the peace and beauty they so richly deserved. My sister, Clara, and her husband, Mark, were supposed to be meeting us at the restaurant. I'd sent them the address, a separate invitation. The thought of them caused a familiar, tiny knot to tighten in my stomach, a reflexive bracing I'd been practicing my whole life. Clara and I had a complicated history, a polite but chilly distance that had grown into a frozen tundra over the years. She was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who'd married her high school sweetheart and stayed in our hometown, while I was the awkward, driven one who had fled for the city and the anonymity of corporate life. Her life was a carefully curated Instagram feed of domestic bliss. Mine was a series of spreadsheets and late-night flights. She resented my success, and I resented her for making me feel like I constantly had to apologize for it. Still, this was for Mom and Dad. For one day, we could all be a family. I grabbed the leather portfolio from the car and started up the long, crushed shell driveway. The sound was crisp under my sensible heels. As I got closer to the house, I could hear voices. A man's voice, raised and sharp, cutting through the gentle sigh of the waves. My smile faltered. An argument? Maybe some local was giving them a hard time about being on the property. I picked up my pace, a prickle of unease on my skin. The voice grew louder, angrier. It wasn't a stranger. I knew that voice. It was Mark. I rounded a corner of the porch, and the scene that unfolded in front of me stopped my heart cold. My mother was pressed against the white railing, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders shaking. My father, his face ashen and his hands trembling, stood protectively in front of her. And there, standing in the open doorway of the house, their house was my sister's husband, Mark. His face was a mask of crimson fury, a vein throbbing in his temple. He had one arm braced against the doorframe, a posture of arrogant ownership, and his finger was pointed directly at my father's chest. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Mark bellowed, his voice echoing in the quiet air, "but it's over. This is my house, my family's house, so I'm going to tell you one more time. Get out!" My father flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, but only a choked sound came out. My mother let out a sob, a raw, wounded sound that ripped through me. And then, from the shadows of the doorway behind Mark, I saw my sister. Clara was leaning against the wall, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. She was watching my parents crumble, and she was enjoying it. She caught my mother's eye and let out a small, derisive laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated cruelty. The world seemed to slow down. The portfolio in my hand suddenly felt as heavy as a block of cement. The salt air tasted like ash in my mouth. My blood turned to ice, and then, just as quickly, to fire. For a moment, I was paralyzed, a spectator in a nightmare I couldn't comprehend. Mark, my loutish, perpetually aggrieved brother-in-law, claiming this house. Clara, laughing at our mother's pain. It didn't make sense. It was a tear in the fabric of reality. Then Mark took a step toward my father, puffing out his chest. "Did you hear me, old man?" I said, "Get out." That's when I moved. I walked forward, my heels crunching deliberately on the shells, each step a hammer blow of rage. They hadn't seen me yet. Their sick little drama was too consuming. What the hell is going on here? My voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. Silence fell, a thick, shocked silence. Mark froze, his finger still pointing at my father. He turned his head slowly, his eyes widening in surprise. My mother's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes finding mine, a wave of desperate relief washing over her face. My father sagged, as if my presence alone had taken a physical weight off his shoulders. But it was Clara's reaction that I would never forget. Her smirk vanished, melting away like snow in a fire. Her face went slack with shock shock, then tightened into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. The triumph in her eyes was replaced by the cold, hard glint of a cornered animal. She knew. In that instant, she knew the game was up. The silence stretched, broken only by the cry of a distant gull and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. The four people who made up the core of my world stood frozen on the porch of a house that was supposed to be a dream, a place of peace, but had become a battlefield in the space of a heartbeat. Mark was the first to recover, his bluster returning like a tide. He lowered his hand and tried for a casual sneer, but it didn't quite reach his panicked eyes. Well, look who decided to show up. Your daughter, the big shot. Come to see our new place? He gestured grandly at the house behind him. What do you think? Quite the upgrade for us. I ignored him completely. My eyes were locked on Clara. What did he just say? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. What did he mean? His house. Clara pushed herself off the wall, smoothing down her perfectly pressed linen dress. She was trying to reclaim her composure, to project an aura of unassailable confidence. It's exactly what it sounds like, Sarah, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You bought us a house. A very, very generous gift. We were just surprised that Mom and Dad seemed to think it was for them. A little misunderstanding, that's all. A laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound, devoid of any humor. A misunderstanding? You called trying to throw our parents off the property a misunderstanding? I took a step closer, my gaze flicking to my mother, who was now clinging to my father's arm. You were making our mother cry on her 50th wedding anniversary. Oh, please, Clara scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. She's always been overly dramatic. You know that. They got confused. They're getting old. They probably heard what they wanted to hear when you told them about the surprise. My father finally found his voice. It was hoarse, trembling with a mixture of confusion and rage. Confused? Clara, you told us Sarah had arranged for you to be the caretakers, that you would live here and we could visit. You showed us a letter. A letter. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. I looked at Clara, and for the first time, I saw the full depth of the deception in her eyes. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment power play. This was premeditated. Dad, there was no letter, I said, my voice firm. I held up the portfolio. This is the only thing that matters. The deed, the closing documents, the wire transfer confirmations from my bank account. Everything is in here, and the deed is in your name and Mom's name. Exclusively, Mark snorted. Paperwork can be faked. We have a gift letter from Sarah, signed and notarized, stating the house was a gift to me and Clara. It's ironclad. The audacity of it was breathtaking. A forged gift letter. They had actually gone to the trouble of faking a legal document. They must have been planning this for weeks. Ever since I'd first mentioned I was doing something big for the anniversary, they had laid a trap, and our parents had walked right into it. A gift letter? I said, my voice dangerously low. Show it to me. We don't have to show you anything, Mark blustered, stepping forward again. Now you can either leave with them, or I can call the police and have all three of you arrested for trespassing. Go ahead, I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Call them. I'd love to see their faces when they run the property records. I'd love to provide them with the name of my attorney who handled the entire purchase. I'd love for them to compare the signature on your gift letter with my actual signature on file with the bank that holds my multi-million-dollar accounts. The same accounts I used to buy this $425,000 property in cash. I let that hang in the air, the number a stark, brutal weapon. I saw Mark flinch. He was a small-time contractor who was always chasing his debts. That figure was more money than he'd seen in his entire life. Clara's face paled. She shot a panicked look at her husband. The bluster was failing. The lie was too big, too fragile, and I was calling them on it with facts and figures they couldn't refute. This was the moment. The moment the balance of power shifted entirely. Clara, seeing her dream of a seaside mansion slipping away, abandoned all pretense of civility. Her carefully constructed facade of the calm, reasonable sister crumbled, and the raw, festering jealousy I'd known my whole life came pouring out in a torrent of venom. You always do this, she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. You always have to be the hero, the rich one, swooping in to make everyone else look small. You think you can just buy everything, don't you? You think money makes you better than everyone else. This isn't about money, Clara, I said, though it was. It was about everything the money represented. My escape, my success, my independence from the toxic dynamics of our family she had always thrived in. Of course it is, she screamed, taking a step towards me, her hands clenched into fists. You couldn't just give them a nice gift. You had to do this. A mansion. Something so ridiculously over the top that it makes everything Mark and I do for them look like nothing. We're here for them, day in and day out. We take them to doctor's appointments. We fix their leaky faucet, while you're off in the city playing CEO. We deserve this. We've earned it. It was a confession, a full-throated admission of her motive. It wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about resentment. It was about a perceived cosmic injustice that she had decided to correct by force. She believed she was owed this. My success was not my own. It was a debt she was now calling in. My mother, who had been silent and weeping, suddenly straightened up. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but laced with steel. Earned it? You earned it by terrifying your father and making me weep on the day we're meant to be celebrating 50 years of marriage? Is that how you earn things, Clara? Clara whirled on our mother. Oh, don't you start. You always took her side. Always. Little genius Sarah, who could do no wrong. Well, she's not so perfect, is she? Remember that time after her accident? All those little pills she was taking? Who was there for her then? Me. I was the one who had to deal with her when she was a mess. It was a low blow, a poisoned dart aimed directly at my deepest insecurity. 10 years ago, after a brutal car accident, I'd had a brief, terrifying dependency on the painkillers I was was prescribed. It was a dark period of my life, one I had fought my way out of with therapy and sheer force of will. I had confided in Clara during the worst of it, a rare moment of vulnerability, and now she was using it as a weapon, trying to paint me as an unstable addict in front of our parents. I saw a flicker of doubt in my father's eyes, and it broke my heart. That was her goal, to discredit me, to make my grand gesture seem like the manic act of an unstable person. Before I could even respond, my father spoke, his voice no longer trembling but booming with a righteous anger I had not heard in years. "That's enough, Clara." He stepped forward, putting himself between Clara and me, between Clara and our mother. He was no longer the frail, trembling old man from moments before. He was a lion defending his family. "Your sister was in pain. We were all worried, but she fought, and she got better. She built a life for herself, a good life, and she used the fruits of that life to do something beautiful for us, for your mother and me. What you have done here today, it is shameful. It is a stain on this family." Mark, seeing his last line of attack fail, made a final, desperate move. He lunged for the portfolio in my hand. "I'll take that," he snarled, but he was clumsy with rage, and I was coiled with adrenaline. I sidestepped him easily, pulling the portfolio out of his reach. He stumbled, catching himself on the porch railing, his face a mask of disbelief. He had actually tried to physically take it from me. That was the final line. I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police, Mark," I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass. "You have 2 minutes to get in your car with my sister and leave this property before they arrive. If you are still here when they pull up, I will press charges for trespassing, harassment, and attempted theft. And I will tell them all about your fraudulent gift letter." I imagine the district attorney's office will be very interested in that. The threat of real, legal consequences, of men with badges and guns, finally broke them. Mark's face went white. He looked at Clara, his eyes begging for a new plan, a new lie. But she had nothing left. Her face was a ruin of hate and defeat. She stared at me, her eyes burning with a promise of future vengeance, then turned without a word and stalked toward her car parked further down the drive. Mark, deflated and beaten, shot one last venomous glare at my father before scurrying after her. We stood there on the porch, the three of us, and watched as their car roared to life, spat gravel from its tires, and sped away down the long driveway until it was just a dark speck disappearing down the coastal road. The sudden silence was deafening. The argument was over, the immediate threat gone, but the air was thick with the toxic fallout. My mother finally broke, collapsing into my father's arms in a storm of ragged sobs. My father held her, stroking her hair, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. I stood apart, my phone still clutched in my hand, the leather portfolio pressed against my chest like a shield. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a profound, shaking exhaustion. The joy I had felt just 15 minutes earlier was gone, poisoned, replaced by a grief so vast it felt like a physical weight. I had bought my parents a house, but in the process, I had lost my only sister. Or perhaps, I had simply been forced to see that I had never really had her at all. The beautiful seaside mansion loomed behind us, its windows like vacant eyes, a silent witness to the ugliness that had just transpired on its pristine porch. The dream had become a crime scene, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was only the beginning of the fight. The immediate aftermath was a blur of practicalities and raw emotion. I guided my parents inside, into the vast, empty living room that was supposed to have been filled with laughter and champagne toasts. Instead, my mother sank onto the bare hardwood floor, her back against a wall, and cried until she had no tears left. My father, ever the stoic, busied himself with checking windows and doors, a man trying to physically secure a fortress that had already been breached emotionally. I called the car service and canceled their return trip, then called the restaurant and canceled our reservation. Each call was a small, painful dismantling of the perfect day I had planned. Finally, I sat on the floor next to my mother, not touching her, just being present. The setting sun cast long, orange shadows across the room, painting everything in a melancholic glow. "I'm so sorry, Mom," I whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I wanted this to be a happy day. I never imagined." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "This is not your fault, Sarah," she said, her voice raspy from crying. "This is Clara. This is who she is. I think I've known for a long time, but I didn't want to see it." My father came and sat with us, completing our small, broken circle. "Your mother is right," he said, his hand resting on my shoulder. "We've made excuses for her whole life. She's sensitive. She's just jealous of her sister. We enabled this. We let the poison spread. Today, it just finally came to a head. We talked for hours as darkness fell outside, the only light coming from the moon on the water. We talked about Clara's childhood, the small cruelties that had been dismissed as sibling rivalry. We talked about Mark's influence, his own deep-seated bitterness and greed feeding her worst instincts. It was a painful but necessary autopsy of a relationship, laying bare the sickness that had been festering for decades. It was in that dark, empty house that we began to understand the full scope of the betrayal. It wasn't just about a house. It was about a lifetime of perceived slights and a bottomless well of envy. The next morning, I awoke on a sleeping bag I'd found in a closet, my back aching to the smell of coffee. My father had found a forgotten bag of grounds left by the previous owners and was brewing it in a saucepan on the stove. It was a small act of normalcy that felt like a lifeline. As we drank the bitter, grainy coffee from mugs we'd rinsed in the sink, I laid out the plan. I was not going to let this go. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was fraud. This was attempted theft on a grand scale. My first call was to Julian Croft, my lawyer. He was a shark in a $1,000 suit who had handled all my corporate contracts for the last decade. He was expensive, ruthless, and exactly what I needed. started. I explained the situation, my voice flat and clinical as I recounted the events of the previous day. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Let me get this straight," Julian said, his voice a low growl. "Your sister and her husband occupied a property you purchased, attempted to eject the rightful owners, your parents, and are claiming ownership based on a fraudulent gift letter they claim you signed?" "That's the short version, yes," I replied. "Sarah, this is beyond a mere civil dispute. Forging a legal document like a notarized gift letter is a felony. We need to move on two fronts. First, I'll file for an immediate temporary restraining order against both of them, preventing them from coming within 500 feet of the property or your parents. Second, I'm going to advise you to file a police report. This needs to be on the record." The thought of filing a police report against my own sister made me feel ill, but I knew he was right. This had to be handled formally, clinically, with a wall of legal procedure between my family and hers. "Do it," I said. "Everything. I don't care what it costs." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal action. I drove my parents to the local police station, a quaint brick building that felt entirely unequipped for the drama we were bringing through its doors. We sat with a detective, a kind, tired-looking man named Miller, and gave our statements. I handed over a copy of the deed, the wire transfer records, and a detailed timeline of events. He listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I got to the part about the forged gift letter, he leaned forward. "Do you have this letter?" he asked. "No," I said. "They refused to show it to me. They just claim to have it." "Okay," he said, making a note. "That will be a key piece of evidence. Their lawyer, if they have one, will likely have to produce it during discovery in the civil case. Once we get our hands on it, we can send it to the state crime lab for forensic analysis." Leaving the station, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. The system was engaged, the gears of justice were beginning to turn, slowly and impersonally, but I had also formally declared war on my sister. There was no going back. While Julian handled the legal filings, my next task was building a support system. My parents were traumatized, jumping at every sound, peering nervously out the windows. The house that was supposed to be their sanctuary felt like a prison. I found a local therapist who specialized in trauma and elder emotional abuse and booked them an appointment. Then I made a call I had been putting off to my Uncle Ben, my father's younger brother. Ben was the family historian and its moral compass. He was a retired history professor, a gentle soul with a keen eye for human nature. He had always seen Clara's manipulative tendencies more clearly than anyone. "I'm not surprised, Sarah," he said sadly after I told him everything. "I'm heartbroken, but I'm not surprised. Clara has always believed the world owes her something. Your success has been eating away at her for years. I suppose this was her way of trying to level the playing field in her own mind." He paused. "What do you need from me? Right now? Just for you to believe us?" I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know she's going to start calling people. She's going to tell them I'm crazy, or vindictive, or that this is all a misunderstanding she's being victimized in." "Let her," Ben said, his voice firm. "Anyone who knows you, truly knows you, will not believe her for a second. Your mother and father are good people. You are a good person. That will be your shield. I'll make some calls myself, quietly, just to make sure the rest of the family hears the truth before she can poison the well." His support was a balm on a raw wound. It was the beginning of drawing lines, of understanding who was truly family and who was merely a relative. The final piece of my initial strategy was compiling every scrap of evidence I could find. I spent an entire day in a rented office space, printing out emails between myself and the real estate agent, text messages with my parents, where I joyfully hinted at their big surprise, bank statements, everything. I created a binder, thick and meticulously organized, with tabs for each category of evidence. It was a cold, impersonal record of what was supposed to be the most heartfelt gift of my life. The process was draining, each document a reminder of my shattered intentions. But with each piece of paper I added to the binder, I felt my resolve harden. Clara and Mark had come at us with lies and aggression. I would come back at them with the truth, documented, verified, and unassailable. I was building a fortress of facts, and I would not let them tear it down. The retaliation came faster than I expected. Less than a week after the confrontation, a process server arrived at the Seaside house and served my parents, and subsequently me, with a lawsuit. Clara and Mark were suing me for breach of verbal contract, claiming I had explicitly promised them the house as a gift for their years of service to the family and was now reneging. They were also petitioning the court to grant them temporary possession of the property, pending the outcome of the lawsuit. It was an audacious, disgusting legal maneuver, designed to inflict maximum pain and financial cost. But it was the affidavits attached to the lawsuit that truly took my breath away. In them, Clara painted a picture of me as a flighty, mentally unstable drug addict with a history of making grandiose promises and then cruelly snatching them away. She twisted my past struggles with prescription painkillers into a full-blown narrative of raging, ongoing addiction. She described me as delusional, claiming I suffered from memory lapses and was easily confused. She even got one of our cousins, a woman named Debbie who had always been firmly in Clara's orbit, to sign a statement saying she had overheard me telling Clara the house was hers. It was a complete fabrication, a piece of perjury designed to assassinate my character. "This is standard procedure for scumbags," Julian said bluntly over the phone after I'd emailed him the documents. "They can't attack the facts, the deed, the money trail, so they attack the person. They're trying to muddy the waters, to make you seem like an unreliable witness. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. I felt a hot, sickening shame reading those words, seeing my most vulnerable moment twisted into a caricature of a monster. I had to sit with my parents and explain explain the full story of my past dependency, a conversation I had never wanted to have. To their immense credit, they listened with love and compassion, their anger directed not at me, but at Clara for her cruelty. But the damage was done. The poison was out there. The next phase of her attack was mobilizing the family. The phone calls started. Aunts, uncles, cousins, calling my parents, calling me. Some were supportive, like Uncle Ben, who had already begun his quiet campaign of truth, but many were not. They were confused, caught in the middle, or worse, swayed by Clara's narrative. "We just heard the most awful thing," one aunt said to my mother. "Clara told us Sarah is having some kind of breakdown, that she's trying to take away the house she promised them. Is there anything we can do to help mediate?" Clara was playing the victim brilliantly. She was the devoted local daughter, being bullied by her rich, unstable city slicker sister. To those who didn't know the whole story, it was a plausible, even compelling, narrative. Each phone call was a fresh assault, forcing my parents to defend themselves, to relive the trauma, to explain the ugliness over and over again. Then came the financial pressure. Mark's brother, a shady character who ran a used car dealership, called my father. He made a vague, threatening offer. "Look, this is all getting messy," he'd said. "Lawyers, courts, it's expensive. Why don't you just sign the house over to them? Mark and Clara are willing to be generous. They'll give you a little something for your trouble, let you walk away clean." It was a gangster tactic, a thinly veiled attempt at coercion. My father, incensed, told him exactly where he could go and hung up, but the call left him shaken. They were not just fighting a legal battle, they were fighting a campaign of intimidation on all fronts. The lowest point for me came about a month into the ordeal. The legal bills were already piling up. I was flying back and forth from the city every weekend. I was barely sleeping, my work was suffering, and the stress was constant. One night, alone in a sterile hotel room near my parents' house, I found myself staring at the minibar, at the little bottles of vodka, and feeling a pull I hadn't felt in a decade. The desire to just numb it all, to make the anxiety and the anger and the grief disappear for a few hours, was overwhelming. My hands were shaking. Clara's words echoed in my head: unstable, addict, a mess. I was dangerously close to proving her right. That was my rock-bottom crisis. I saw the abyss opening up before me, the easy, destructive path of surrender. And in that moment, I had to make a choice. I could let my sister destroy me, or I could fight back with everything I had. I didn't open the minibar. Instead, I picked up the phone and called my sponsor, a woman who had been my rock during my recovery 10 years prior. I talked for an hour, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of fear and rage. She listened, and when I was done, she said something I've never forgotten. "They are trying to make you into the person they need you to be to justify their own behavior. Don't you dare let them." That conversation was a turning point. It was the moment my fear solidified into cold, hard resolve. Clara wanted to fight dirty? Fine. I had Julian, and Julian fought dirtier than anyone, but he did it with the full, righteous force of the law. The next morning, I called him. "Julian," I said, my voice steady, "I want you to stop playing defense. I want you to go on the attack, subpoena their phone records, their bank statements, their emails. I want to know everything. I want to find that forged letter, and I want to bury them with it." There was a pause, and then I heard a slow smile in Julian's voice. "Now we're talking," he said. "Let's go hunting." The war was on, and I had just committed my entire arsenal to the fight. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine, designed to wear you down through sheer attrition. The next 6 months were a blur of depositions, discovery motions, and procedural hearings. It was a tedious, soul-crushing slog, punctuated by moments of high anxiety and small, incremental victories. Julian was a master of this world. He filed motions that forced Clara and Mark to produce mountains of financial documents. He scheduled depositions that lasted for days, grilling them under oath until their stories were riddled with inconsistencies. I had to sit for a deposition myself, a grueling 8-hour session where Clara's lawyer, a smarmy man named Peterson, tried every trick in the book to rattle me. He brought up my past dependency on painkillers, reading from Clara's vicious affidavit as if it were gospel. He twisted my words, baited me, tried to paint me as a liar, but I was prepared. My therapist had worked with me for weeks on grounding techniques, on how to remain calm and factual under fire. I answered every question with a cold, monotonous precision, refusing to take the bait. I simply repeated the facts. I bought the house, the deed is in my parents' names, I never wrote a gift letter, and my sister is lying. By the end of the day, Peterson was visibly frustrated. I hadn't given him the emotional outburst he could use against me. My parents also had to be deposed. It was torture for them, but they were magnificent. My father, with his quiet dignity, and my mother, with her newfound steel, calmly and clearly recounted the events of the anniversary. They never wavered, even when Peterson tried to portray them as confused, senile old people who had been manipulated by me. The real work was happening behind the scenes, in the mountain of documents Julian's team was sifting through. We were looking for one thing above all else: the forged gift letter. As Detective Miller had predicted, they were forced to produce it during discovery. When Julian finally got a copy and forwarded it to me, my blood ran cold. It was a decent forgery. The signature looked like mine, at a glance. They had even faked a notary stamp and signature. It was dated 2 weeks before the anniversary. On paper, it looked legitimate enough to create doubt, which was its entire purpose. "Don't worry," Julian assured me. "Amateurs always make mistakes." He sent the document, along with dozens of samples of my real signature from bank checks, contracts, and my passport, to a forensic document examiner he had on retainer. While we waited for the expert's report, Julian's team made another key discovery. Sifting through Mark's bank records, they found a series of cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to the anniversary. anniversary. The amounts were small, but they added up to several $1,000s. On their own, they meant nothing. But then they cross-referenced them with subpoenaed phone records. On the same days as the withdrawals, there were multiple calls between Mark and his brother, the shady car dealer. And on the day after the last withdrawal, there was a call to a man who, after a little digging, turned out to be a disgraced notary public who had lost his license for falsifying documents. "We've got them," Julian said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "They didn't use a real notary. They paid some crook to fake the stamp and signature. Mark's brother was the middleman. The cash withdrawals were the payment. It was a conspiracy, a clear, provable case of felony fraud. They had built their entire case on a lie, and we had just found the blueprint for how they'd constructed it." The evidentiary turning point came a week later, with the arrival of the forensic examiner's report. It was a dense, technical document, but its conclusion was devastatingly simple. The signature on the gift letter, while a skillful imitation, was a forgery. The expert identified nearly a dozen points of divergence. Microscopic hesitations in the pen strokes, indicative of tracing, unnatural pen lifts, and a subtle tremor that was inconsistent with my natural, fluid signature. But the real bombshell was the notary stamp. Using high-resolution imaging, the expert determined that the stamp was not made from a unique custom die, as all official notary stamps are. It was a digital fake, created on a computer and printed with a high-end laser printer. It was a forgery of a forgery. When Julian presented this evidence to Peterson, Clara, and Mark's lawyer, the tone of the entire case shifted. The bluster and aggression vanished, replaced by a panicked silence. Julian made a strategic decision. We could have taken this evidence to the district attorney and pushed for immediate criminal charges, but Julian advised a different course. "Let's use it to win the civil case first," he explained. "We present this in court, we get a definitive judgment in our favor, we get the permanent restraining order, and we get a judgment for our legal fees. Once the civil court has officially ruled the document a fraud, the D.A.'s case becomes a slam dunk. They won't be able to plead ignorance. They'll be cornered." It was a brilliant strategy, ensuring we achieved our primary goal, securing the house and my parents' safety, before turning to the matter of criminal punishment. We refused all of Peterson's sudden, desperate offers to settle. I didn't want a settlement. I didn't want their money. I wanted a judge, in a court of law, to declare, for the public record, that my sister and her husband were liars and criminals. I wanted vindication. So we pushed forward, toward a trial date. The final confrontation was set. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating space of dark wood and high ceilings. It felt cold, devoid of all emotion, a place where feelings were irrelevant and only facts, twisted and presented by lawyers, mattered. My parents sat in the front row behind me, my father's hand resting on my mother's shoulder. Uncle Ben was there, a quiet pillar of support. On the other side of the room, Clara and Mark sat with their lawyer, Peterson. Clara refused to look at me, staring straight ahead with a look of defiant bitterness. Mark just looked small and terrified. The trial lasted 3 days. The first 2 were a methodical presentation of our case. Julian was magnificent, a conductor leading an orchestra of evidence. He called the real estate agent to the stand, who testified that I was the sole purchaser and that my explicit instructions were for the deed to be in my parents' names. He presented the bank records, the wire transfers, the deed itself. It was a mountain of dry, boring, irrefutable proof. Then, it was my turn to testify. As I walked to the stand, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The formal confrontation. I could feel Clara's eyes on me, burning with hate. Peterson would be cross-examining me, and I knew he would come at me with everything he had. I sat down, took a deep breath, and found my father's eyes in the gallery. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. I remembered what my therapist had told me. Breathe. State the facts. Do not engage with the emotion. You are a rock, and his waves will break against you. Julian led me through my testimony. I recounted the story from the beginning. My desire to do something special for my parents. The search for the house, the joy I felt, and the horror of what I found on their anniversary. My voice was steady, my answers concise. Then it was Peterson's turn. He approached the stand with a predatory smile. "Miss Miller," he began, his voice oozing with false sympathy. "It's true, is it not, that you have a history of substance abuse issues?" "Objection," Julian said calmly. "Relevance. It speaks to the witness's credibility and memory, Your Honor," Peterson countered. "I'll allow it, but be careful where you're going with this, counselor," the judge warned. "I had a brief doctor-supervised dependency on prescribed medication following a severe car accident 10 years ago," I said, looking directly at the judge, not at Peterson. "I have been in full recovery for a decade." Peterson tried to press, bringing up details from Clara's affidavit, but I refused to be drawn in. I gave him nothing but calm, factual answers. He shifted tactics, trying to portray me as a neglectful daughter who threw money at her parents out of guilt. "Isn't it true you see your parents only a few times a year?" he sneered. "I see them as often as my career allows," I replied evenly. This house was meant to give me a place to spend more time with them, not less. He couldn't land a glove on me. My refusal to become emotional, to rise to his bait, was making him look like a bully. He was flailing. Finally, he gave up, slumping back to his table in defeat. The final day of the trial was for the expert witnesses. Julian called our forensic document examiner to the stand. She was a poised, articulate woman who calmly and methodically dismantled the forged gift letter, piece by piece. She explained the pen lifts, the hesitation marks, the digitally fabricated notary stamp. She presented large, blown-up images for the judge to see, pointing out the flaws with a laser pointer. It was a clinical, devastating assassination of their entire case. When she was finished, a hush fell over the courtroom. The judge looked over at Peterson. "Do you have an expert to rebut this testimony?" he asked. Peterson, looking pale, stood up. "No, Your Honor. The defense rests. It was over. They had nothing. No counter-argument, no defense, no hope." The judge took less than an hour to return with his verdict. He looked down from his bench, his expression stern. "In the matter of Miller versus Miller, this court finds overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah Miller, and the rightful owners of the property, Thomas and Eleanor Miller." He went on, his words like hammer blows. He declared the gift letter a brazen and amateurish forgery, and found that Clara Miller and Mark Peterson had acted with malicious intent to defraud. He issued a permanent restraining order, barring them from the property and from contacting my parents or me, and he ordered them to pay my full legal fees, a sum that I knew would be financially ruinous for them. He looked directly at Clara and Mark. "The evidence of criminal fraud presented in this courtroom is substantial," he said, his voice cold. "I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation. I suggest you retain criminal counsel." Clara let out a small, strangled gasp. Mark sank in his chair, his face ashen. It was a total, absolute victory. We had won. Justice, in the cold, formal mechanism of the court, had been served. But as I watched my sister, a woman I had shared a childhood with, a woman who was now a convicted fraudster and a future criminal defendant, I felt no joy, only a profound, bottomless sadness. The verdict was not a celebration. It was a death certificate for our family. It was the bittersweet, incomplete justice I had fought for. I had saved my parents' home, but the cost had been immense. In the weeks that followed the verdict, the world slowly began to settle into a new, fractured reality. The district attorney's office did, in fact, press charges. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the judge's scathing referral, Clara and Mark took a plea deal. They pleaded guilty to felony forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud. They avoided jail time, receiving 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and a permanent criminal record. It was the epitome of incomplete justice. They would not be imprisoned for the emotional terrorism they had inflicted, but their lives were irrevocably altered. Mark, with a felony conviction, lost his contractor's license. They were forced to sell their own home to pay the fine and the judgment for my legal fees. They were, in a word, ruined. There was no sense of triumph in this knowledge, only a grim, weary acceptance. I had a long conversation with my therapist about it, trying to process the strange emptiness that followed the victory. "You were hoping the verdict would heal the wound," she told me. "But a court can't do that. It can only assign blame and consequence. The healing is your work, and it's a separate process." She was right. The legal battle was over, but the emotional recovery was just beginning. My parents and I had to decide what to do with the house. For a while, the beautiful Seaside mansion felt haunted by the conflict. The wraparound porch was no longer a place of peaceful contemplation, but the scene of the crime. My mother couldn't look at the front door without picturing Mark standing there, yelling at her husband. We seriously considered selling it, just to wash our hands of the whole affair and let the bad memories go with the deed. But one evening, as we sat on the back deck watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, my mother made a decision. "No," she said, her voice firm. "We're not letting them take this from us too. They've taken enough. This is our home. We are going to fill it with good memories. We are going to reclaim it." And so, we did. The process of making the house a home became a form of therapy. We hired a new contractor. We painted the walls, not in neutral beiges, but in warm, vibrant colors. We tore out the old landscaping by the porch and planted a garden of my mother's favorite roses. We bought furniture that was comfortable and sturdy, pieces that felt like they had always belonged to us. We filled the empty shelves with books and family photos, the old ones, from before the schism. Each nail hammered, each wall painted, was an act of defiance, a reclaiming of space and of peace. The most important step was establishing permanent, non-negotiable boundaries. I changed my phone number. I blocked Clara, Mark, and any of their flying monkey relatives on all social media. I sent a formal, legally worded letter via Julian to every family member who had sided with them or pressured us, stating that they were no longer welcome in our lives and that any attempt to contact us would be considered harassment. It was a brutal, painful culling of the family tree, severing branches that had been part of my life for 40 years, but it was necessary. It was an act of survival, of creating a safe space where we no longer had to fear the next attack. Life settled into a new rhythm. I continued my therapy, working through the complex grief of losing a sibling. My parents, in their reclaimed home, began to heal. My father took up fishing again, spending his mornings on the local pier. My mother joined a gardening club and filled the house with flowers. I visited them often, no longer out of a sense of frantic obligation, but because I wanted to be there. We would cook together, walk on the beach, and sit on the porch, the same porch, and watch the waves, talking for hours or sometimes not talking at all, content just to be in each other's presence. The house was no longer a symbol of conflict, but of resilience. It was our fortress, built on a foundation of truth and defended by hard-won boundaries. I still think about Clara sometimes, usually in quiet, unguarded moments. I don't feel anger anymore, just a profound sense of pity and loss. I see her as a tragic figure, consumed by a jealousy so powerful it led her to destroy her own life in an attempt to ruin mine. I have to accept that the sister I thought I had, the one I remembered from fleeting moments of childhood laughter, maybe never really existed, or if she did, she was lost a long time ago. 1 year after the confrontation, on my parents' 51st anniversary, I drove up to the Seaside house. There was no big surprise this time, no grand gesture. I just brought a good bottle of wine and a homemade cake. I found my parents on the back deck, holding hands, watching the tide come in. My mother's rose garden was in full, glorious bloom. My father had a peaceful, contented look on his face that I hadn't seen in years. The house behind them was filled with light light and warmth. The scars were still there, of course. We were all changed by what had happened. The trust in the world, in the idea of family, had been broken and could never be fully repaired, but we had survived. We had built something new and stronger in the ruins of the old. I sat down with them, and we opened the wine, toasting not the house, not the victory, but ourselves, to our resilience, to our small, broken but beautiful family of 3, secure in our fortress by the sea, finally at peace. The sun set, the waves crashed, and for the first time in a very long time, everything felt right.